All right, let's get into it. We talk about the 13 colonies like they were always this one big thing. But how did we get there? It all started with just one tiny, fragile settlement, Jamestown. And from there, it became this story of slow, steady, and pretty deliberate expansion. So in this explainer, we're going to break down how that one little foothold grew into a powerful system of 13 very different colonies.
There's a simple truth here. One colony isn't an empire. Sure, Jamestown surviving in 1607 was a huge deal, but that alone wasn't going to build real power for England in the New World. No, for that, they needed a whole network. This is the story of how that system got built, one colony at a time.
You can think of Jamestown as the crucial proof of concept. After some really tough years, its success with tobacco showed everyone a really important idea. A permanent English settlement across the ocean wasn't just some fantasy. It could actually be incredibly profitable. And that one success, it completely changed the game, turning colonization from a super high-risk gamble into a real long-term strategy.
So here's how we're going to walk through this. First, we'll look at that big mental shift from just surviving to actually expanding. Then, we'll take a tour through the three very distinct regions that popped up: New England, the Middle Colonies, and the South. And finally, we'll see how these separate worlds were kind of forged into a single system, one that would become the foundation of a new empire.
So the first big change was really all about mindset. Once Jamestown was stable and actually making money, the goal wasn't just about making it through the next winter anymore. England started to see the massive potential here, and the whole strategy shifted to active expansion. That meant more people, more land, and setting up brand new colonies all along the Atlantic coast.
So what was really driving all this? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was kind of like three powerful currents pushing people across the ocean. First, you had economic opportunity, the dream of owning land and finding wealth you just couldn't get back in Europe. Second was the search for religious freedom, which pushed entire communities to find a place where they could worship without being persecuted. And third, there was strategy. This was a high-stakes chess match with rivals like Spain and France for control of North America. And these three motives, they're super important because they ended up creating three very different kinds of societies.
Let's start our journey up north, in the New England colonies. This region was pretty unique because it wasn't founded mainly for profit. Nope, it was founded for principle. The search for religious freedom was the engine driving everything here, and it shaped their whole society.
So we're talking about this cluster of colonies in the Northeast. It all started with those first settlements at Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay. And from there, other groups, looking for their own version of religious or political freedom, kind of pushed outward, setting up New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island.
You see, the New England story really begins with two key groups. First, way back in 1620, you have the Pilgrims, who were religious separatists, and they set up Plymouth. Then, just 10 years later, a much bigger, much better funded group of Puritans arrived. They wanted to reform the Church of England, and they founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, unlike the solo adventurers in early Jamestown, these folks often came over as entire families, even whole congregations. They built these planned towns with a church right in the center, creating a society that was all about shared values from day one.
Okay, let's head south a bit, into the Middle Colonies. If New England was all about religious rules, this central area was all about diversity and business. It really became the great melting pot of colonial America, a crucial crossroads that connected the North and the South.
This region here, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, it developed this incredibly balanced economy. Their farmland was so fertile, they became known as the breadbasket of the colonies, growing way more grain than they needed. And all that farming wealth, it fueled these amazing port cities like Philadelphia and New York, which turned into massive hubs for trade. But what really set the Middle Colonies apart was the diversity. People from all over Europe came here: English, Dutch, German, Scots-Irish, plus all sorts of religious groups like the Quakers in Pennsylvania. And all that mixing made the region way more tolerant, more dynamic, and just more economically flexible than its neighbors.
All right, let's continue south to our final stop, the Southern Colonies. Now here we see a totally different model of development. The South really built on that original Jamestown idea and grew into this agricultural powerhouse. But its whole economy was built on a very different foundation.
The Southern Colonies stretched all the way from Virginia, that original English base, down through Maryland, the Carolinas, and eventually Georgia. Georgia was actually added pretty late, partly to act as a buffer against Spanish Florida. But the whole region had this warm climate and a long growing season, which was just perfect for growing cash crops on a huge scale. So, the Southern economy was all about the plantation system. And we're not talking about small family farms here. No, these were huge agricultural businesses designed to grow cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo to sell back to Europe. The system was incredibly profitable, but it had one absolute requirement: a massive, steady supply of labor.
So where did they get all these workers? Well, at first, the labor came from indentured servants. These were poor Europeans who basically agreed to work for a few years in exchange for their ticket to America. But as the plantations got bigger and bigger, the planters wanted a more permanent and more exploitable source of labor. This led to a slow but total shift towards the horrific system of chattel slavery. Enslaved Africans and their children were treated as property, becoming the workforce that built the South's incredible wealth, a brutal reality that would tragically define the region for centuries.
So let's just pull back for a second and look at the big picture. You've got three totally distinct worlds that have formed. Up in New England, you have a society of traders and small farmers built on religious belief. In the Middle Colonies, you've got this diverse melting pot that's thriving on farming and trade. And down in the South, the whole society is shaped by the pursuit of profit through the plantation system. Three regions, three different foundations, but all flying the English flag. Now, even though they were so different, these colonies weren't just floating in space. There were these powerful forces that started to tie them all together, to forge them into a real system. And the two most important forces were constant population growth and a growing tradition of governing themselves.
I mean, people just kept coming. For so many back in Europe, life was really hard. You had economic problems, religious persecution, a class system you could never escape. America offered something totally new, the promise of cheap land and a chance to build a new life. And this constant flow of people just fueled more and more expansion, pushing the settlements from the coast deeper and deeper into the continent.
But maybe the biggest deal of all was what happened with government. Think about it. The colonies were 3,000 miles away from London. There was just no way to control them day to day. So that distance created a power vacuum, and the colonists filled it themselves. In Virginia, you get the House of Burgesses, an early kind of representative government. Up in New England, town meetings gave people a direct say in local business. And over time, this created this really powerful culture where colonists just got used to running their own show. And that becomes incredibly important down the road.
So you end up with this kind of split relationship with England. On the one hand, England absolutely controlled trade. They passed laws to make sure all the raw materials from the colonies went to England and that the colonists then bought finished goods from England. It was a system designed to make the mother country rich. But on the other hand, when it came to their own local stuff, their internal politics, the colonies had a surprising amount of freedom. So let's bring this all together. The time from 1607 into the early 1700s was just transformative. What started as these scattered, fragile little outposts had evolved into a structured, expanding colonial system. This really was the foundation of the British Empire in America.
And by the early 1700s, the number was set. From New Hampshire way up north to Georgia way down south, 13 distinct colonies were now sitting there along the Atlantic coast. Each one had its own story, its own economy, its own society, but they were all starting to be seen as part of something bigger.
And that's really the key takeaway here. The growth of these 13 colonies was a whole new chapter. For England, it meant huge economic power and a major foothold in the global race for empire. And for the colonists, it meant growth, development, and a growing sense of their own political identity. The fragile little experiment had become a massive success.
And that leaves us with this huge question, right? We've seen how three very different societies were built from the ground up. But how on earth would these distinct identities, the religious, community-focused North, the diverse commercial Middle, and the agricultural South, how would they ever manage to come together and shape the future of a single nation? Well, the tensions and the strengths that were born in this period would echo for centuries.